Hello everyone. I welcome you to my channel, and I hope you sleep easy today. Tonight, we're starting by going back over 100 years, to a quiet patch of farmland deep in the Bavarian woods. The Hinterkaifeck Murders, 1922. It's 1922, and life on the Hinterkaifeck homestead moves at its own slow rhythm. Long winters, early mornings, the distant sounds of cows in the barn, the crunch of snow underfoot, and a stillness that seems almost peaceful, until it isn't. In the stillness of early spring 1922, a strange and unsettling silence settled over a small farmstead nestled deep in the forests of Bavaria, Germany. The property was known as Hinterkaifeck. It stood alone in the countryside, remote, quiet, and surrounded by dense woods. The isolation that once provided a simple, private life for its residents would soon become the backdrop of one of the most mysterious and disturbing unsolved crimes in German history. The family who lived at Hinterkaifeck consisted of 6 people. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was 63 years old. He lived with his wife, Cecilia, age 72, and their daughter Victoria Gabriel, a 35-year-old widow. Victoria had 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia, named after her grandmother, and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living on the farm was a new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had just arrived the day before the murders took place. The Grubbers were known in the nearby village of Groben, though they kept mostly to themselves. They were hardworking, tending to the livestock and the land. They lived a traditional rural life, early mornings, long days, and quiet evenings. But in the days leading up to the murders, small strange events began to occur around the farm. Andreas Gruber mentioned to a few neighbors that he had discovered footprints in the snow. What unsettled him was that the footprints led from the woods to the house, but there were no tracks returning back into the forest. It appeared as though someone had approached the home and never left. There were also unexplained noises coming from the attic, slow, deliberate movements heard at night. Andreas searched the upper floor and found nothing, yet the sounds continued. A set of house keys disappeared shortly afterward, and a newspaper was discovered that none of the family had purchased. The previous maid had quit 6 months earlier, citing the unsettling atmosphere and noises as her reason for leaving. Now, with a new maid just settling in, the quiet tension on the property was beginning to escalate. The last confirmed sighting of the Gruber family occurred on March 31, 1922. That morning, little Cecilia was present at school. Victoria had attended church earlier in the week. A local machine repairman stopped by and reported that the farm seemed unusually quiet, and he had not seen any members of the family. Several days passed without anyone hearing from the family. The postman noticed the mail piling up. The young girl missed school. Eventually, neighbors grew concerned. On April 4th, several locals arrived at the farm to check on the family. What they found inside would disturb the village for generations. Upon entering the barn, they discovered the bodies of Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and little Cecilia. They had been covered with hay and left lying side by side. Inside the house, they found the maid Maria and the baby Joseph, both murdered in their beds. All 6 had died from repeated blows to the head, most likely inflicted with a mattock, a sharp, heavy farm tool. The killings had been brutal, but what puzzled investigators the most was what had happened after the murders. Someone had remained at the house. The livestock had been fed. Meals had been taken from the kitchen. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney for several days. Neighbors reported that the family dog, which normally barked at strangers, had been unusually quiet. It was as though the killer, or killers, had stayed in the home, calmly tending to the chores, sleeping under the roof, and eating the food, all while the lifeless bodies of the family lay nearby. The police investigation began immediately. They were baffled. Nothing in the house had been stolen. Money was found still in its hiding places. There were no clear signs of forced entry or violent struggle. The killer, whoever it was, had methodically lured members of the family one by one into the barn and struck them down. The remaining victims in the house were killed afterward. The crime appeared to be personal, calculated, and cold. Soon, rumors began to swirl around the village. One theory focused on the disturbing possibility of incest within the family. Victoria, it was whispered, may have had an ongoing relationship with her father, Andreas. Some villagers believed that little Joseph, just 2 years old, was not the son of Victoria's late husband, but rather the product of that relationship. Both Andreas and Victoria had previously been convicted of incest, a crime under German law at the time, and had served brief prison sentences. Could the crime have been motivated by revenge, jealousy, shame? Dozens of suspects were considered. A former suitor of Victoria's was interrogated but released. A group of vagrants passing through the area were questioned. Investigators even theorized that the murderer may have hidden in the house for days or weeks before the killings, possibly in the attic where the footsteps had been heard. Over 100 people were interviewed during the investigation, yet no one was ever arrested. There was no definitive motive, no physical evidence that pointed conclusively to any individual. The case grew cold. In an effort to further the investigation, the skulls of the victims were removed and sent to Munich for forensic analysis. Unfortunately, no breakthroughs came from this, and the skulls were lost during the chaos of World War II bombings. To this day, the victims remain buried in nearby Weidhofen, without their skulls. In 1923, 1 year after the crime, the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse was torn down. It had become a symbol of darkness, a place that people avoided. Nothing was rebuilt on the land. Over the years, the case became folklore. Books were written. Theories emerged. Amateur detectives speculated endlessly. Yet none of the evidence has ever led to a clear answer. Modern police departments and forensic teams have reviewed the case. In 2007, students at a German police academy studied the evidence and developed a theory as to the identity of the killer. However, out of respect for surviving family members, the conclusion was never made public. The mystery remains officially unsolved. What makes the Hinterkaifeck case so haunting is not just the brutality of the crime, but the calm that surrounded it. The fact that someone could murder 6 people, and then stay in the home afterward, feeding animals, sleeping, moving through the house in the quiet of night, living, for a short time, inside the world they had just shattered. The image of a candle flickering in the attic window, the quiet footsteps heard above, the footprints that led in, but not back out. All of it adds up to a crime that feels both real and ghostly, like something pulled from a distant nightmare. In the weeks following the discovery of the crime, the community was gripped by a collective unease. The murders had not only taken the lives of a family, they had pierced the illusion of safety that life in the countryside offered. In Groben and the surrounding villages, doors were locked more tightly. Neighbors looked at each other with suspicion. The idea that someone could commit such an act, and potentially still be among them, was terrifying. In the absence of answers, the townspeople turned to speculation. Some began to believe that the killer had been a drifter, someone passing through the dense forests, perhaps driven by madness or desperation. But others were less certain. They pointed to the deliberate nature of the crime, how the animals were cared for, how meals were eaten, how the killer had shown no signs of rushing. This didn't feel like the work of a stranger. It felt personal, calculated. The local police, unfamiliar with crimes of this magnitude, soon requested assistance from Munich. Investigators from the city arrived and began cataloging evidence, interviewing anyone who might have known the grubbers. Forensic science in the 1920s was rudimentary, but authorities did what they could, mapping out the scene, studying the bodies, and attempting to piece together the sequence of events. They concluded that 4 members of the family were lured into the barn, one by one, perhaps having heard a noise or seen something outside. Each was struck down with a blunt weapon, likely the same matic used on all 6 victims. Afterward, the killer entered the house, where Maria and Joseph were killed in their beds. No one had heard screams. No one had seen movement in the dark. In time, the evidence began to lose its clarity. Too many hands touched the scene. Too many curious villagers wandered through the home before it was fully secured. The crime scene had been contaminated before it could be properly preserved. Investigators were left with partial stories, second-hand accounts, and fragments of a puzzle that refused to come together. One of the more chilling aspects of the case involved Victoria Gabriel. During the autopsy, It was noted that her body showed signs of strangulation in addition to the blows to the head. Little Cazilia's fingers were found to be torn, suggesting she may have still been alive after the first blow, clawing at the hay in a desperate attempt to escape or call for help. These small details added layers of horror to an already grim picture. In the months that followed, the Grubber family's past was investigated in greater depth. Victoria's relationship with her father drew particular attention. The court records confirming their previous convictions for incest cast a shadow over the household. Letters were uncovered from Victoria to a man named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former suitor. Lorenz had once claimed paternity of Joseph but later retracted his statement. When police questioned him, his answers were evasive. Even more disturbingly, he was among the first to arrive at the farm after the murders and reportedly entered the house without hesitation, even unlocking doors with apparent familiarity. Some villagers noted that he seemed too comfortable, too unaffected. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. No physical evidence tied Lorenz, or anyone else, to the crime. For decades, the case sat in police archives, re-examined now and then by detectives hoping to find something others had missed. Over time, new technologies emerged, and with them came new hopes. In the early 2000s, the files were reopened, and a team of criminal psychology students was given access to the material as part of a cold case study. Their analysis suggested a likely suspect based on motive, opportunity, and psychological profile. But out of respect for descendants, the name was withheld from the public. That restraint only deepened the mystery. Theories have continued to multiply. That the killer was a jealous lover, a vengeful relative, a farmhand with a grudge, or even a soldier traumatized by war. Some believe more than one person was involved. Others hold fast to the idea that the murderer lived undetected in the attic for days, perhaps even watching the family's routines before choosing to strike. Over the years, these chilling ideas have become part of the legend. Artists, filmmakers, and writers have all revisited the case, drawn to its eerie stillness and the terrible possibility that the killer remained on the property, calmly living among the dead. The house itself came to be seen as cursed. After it was demolished, rumors spread that no plants would grow where the foundation once lay. Local children dared each other to visit the field at night. Some claimed to hear voices. Others swore they saw lights flicker in the trees. There is no proof of any of this, only the lingering imagination of a community forever touched by what happened there. The Hinterkaifeck murders occupy a unique place in true crime history. They're not merely about the loss of life, they tap into a deeper fear. That someone could violate the sanctity of home in the most horrifying way and then calmly go about their business as if nothing had happened. The anonymity of the crime has allowed it to echo for over a century, each generation adding its own theories, its own shadows. In the absence of answers, the story lives on, whispered among students of criminal history and passed down in the region as both a cautionary tale and an unsolved riddle. What remains most unsettling is the quietness of it all. No one heard the killer arrive. No one heard them leave. There was no confession, no trial, no justice, just silence. And in that silence, the mystery deepened, not with time, but with repetition. Because with every telling of the story, the details become clearer, not dimmer. The footprints in the snow that led in but never out. The creaking floorboards above. The meals taken after the crime. These elements play over in the mind like scenes in a slow, dreamlike film. And perhaps that is why this story endures. Not because of the horror it describes, but because of the unsettling calm that followed. The murderer wasn't in a rush. They didn't flee. They lingered. And in doing so, they left behind more than just a crime scene. They left behind a presence. One that history has not been able to erase. Over a century later, the woods have grown taller. The fields are quiet. And nothing remains of the farm except the story. It is a story with no answers. Only questions. The Isdal Woman, 1970. On a chilly November afternoon in 1970, just outside the city of Borring, Norway, a man and his two daughters were hiking along a remote trail in the Isdalen Valley. The region, often called Death Valley by locals due to its history of fatal hiking accidents and occasional deaths, was silent that day. Mist rolled in between the hills, and the surrounding forest pressed in close. As the trio moved along a narrow footpath, one of the daughters noticed a strange smell in the air. A sharp, burning odor, unmistakable and out of place. Curious, they veered off the trail toward the source. It didn't take long before they saw her. Partially hidden among moss-covered rocks lay the charred body of a woman. She was positioned on her back, her arms bent upward in a strange pose. Her front was severely burned, yet the surrounding vegetation showed no signs of fire. Scattered around the body were various personal items: an umbrella, a watch, a scarf, and partially melted plastic bottles. All of the labels had been removed or scratched off. The body showed no immediate signs of a struggle, but the scene felt eerily staged. Police arrived and secured the area. From the very beginning, the investigators knew this would not be an ordinary case. The woman carried no identification. The labels on her clothes had been cut out. Her fingerprints had been sanded off. Even her dental work, unusually sophisticated, offered no clues. This woman had gone to great lengths to conceal who she was. The autopsy revealed that she had died from a combination of burns and carbon monoxide poisoning. Sleeping pills, over 50 of them, were found in her stomach, along with traces of alcohol. Despite the apparent overdose, the doctors noted that she had been alive when the fire started. Her lungs contained soot. The case quickly became known in the press as the Isdal woman, named after the valley where she was found. Authorities traced a pair of suitcases left at the Borring railway station, which they determined had belonged to her. Inside were clothing items, a prescription lotion, and a notepad. Again, all labels had been removed. But this time, there were a few clues. A pair of sunglasses was found with a partial fingerprint, confirmed to belong to the woman. There were also some cryptic notes written in code, a combination of letters and numbers that at first made little sense. Eventually, investigators managed to decipher the code. It wasn't a complex cipher but rather a personal travel log. Each letter and number corresponded to dates and cities. The woman had traveled across Europe, Italy, Germany, France, and several towns within Norway, all within a matter of weeks. She had stayed in high-end hotels under multiple aliases. In each case, she used a different name, nationality, and backstory. One day she was Belgian, another day French, sometimes claiming to be from South Africa. Her stories always varied slightly, but she spoke fluent English and German, and was remembered as poised, elegant, and calm. Hotel clerks described her as fashionable, distant, and always traveling alone. The Norwegian authorities turned to Interpol. Sketches of her face were circulated. No country reported a missing person matching her description. No family came forward. Over the weeks, a few witnesses surfaced. One remembered her speaking with a man at a hotel. Another believed they had seen her hiking near Borring in the days before her death. A taxi driver recalled picking her up and noted that she was not alone, but his description of the man with her was vague. As the leads thinned, theories began to flourish. Was she a spy? It was the Cold War, after all. Europe was full of quiet agents passing through cities under false identities. Her behavior, changing names, removing labels, using coded notes, seemed to fit the profile. Some speculated that she may have been involved in intelligence operations. Borring was close to several military facilities and a NATO radar station. Others believed she had been pursued, silenced, and her death made to look like she ended her own life. Yet, despite the intrigue, the evidence never quite confirmed these ideas. There were no clear signs of struggle, no witnesses to any confrontation, and the police, after weeks of investigation, officially concluded that the woman had taken her own life. Still, many found that explanation unsatisfying. Her preparations were methodical. She carried multiple wigs. Her teeth had gold crowns common in Central or Eastern Europe. Her luggage contained elegant clothing and expensive items, suggesting she had some means of income. And most strangely of all, she had checked out of her last hotel just hours before being found dead in the woods, after telling staff she was heading to the train station. The autopsy also noted something peculiar. The expression on her face was calm. No signs of panic, no defensive wounds. As if she had accepted what was happening. Or perhaps, as some have wondered, she was not alone at the time. The funeral was quiet. With no family or identity, she was buried in Bergen's Mlendal cemetery in a grave marked only with the date and a brief inscription. Unknown woman found in Isdalen, the 29th of November, 1970. Local police attended. A priest read a few words. Soil was gently placed over the casket. She remains there to this day, still nameless. For decades, the mystery remained unsolved, but not forgotten. In time, new generations of journalists, podcasters, and amateur investigators reignited interest in the case. In 2016, Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, NRK, launched a new investigation. Using modern forensic techniques, they analyzed a preserved tooth and jaw from the original autopsy. Isotope testing suggested that she likely grew up in eastern France or western Germany, possibly near the border, in a region marked by conflict and displacement during World War II. This narrowed her origins, but not her identity. More interviews were conducted. A former military radar technician claimed he had seen her near a restricted facility in the 1970s. Another woman reported a memory from childhood of a foreign woman asking strange questions about mountain trails. But like before, none of the stories led to definitive answers. No relatives were found. Her name was never confirmed. What lingers most about the Isdal woman is not just how she died, but how deliberately she erased herself. Each clue seemed carefully placed, or just as carefully removed. She had traveled through the world quietly, politely, and then disappeared, leaving only fragments behind. There was no clear motive, no confession, only the image of a composed woman, sitting alone in a train station or a hotel lobby, writing notes in code, disappearing into the fog of European cities. And finally, a forest trail in Bergen. A cold November day. A silent valley. For many in Norway, especially those living near Bergen, the mystery of the Isdal woman became a kind of local legend, told in hushed tones, often with a shake of the head or a glance toward the forested hills. The Isdalen Valley, already associated with fatal hiking accidents and suicides in the decades before, now carried a heavier silence. Hikers who ventured into the area in later years often reported a sense of unease, particularly when passing the rocky outcrop where she had been found. Some even claimed the birds seemed quieter there. But beyond the folklore, it was the unsettling precision of her disappearance from the record of the living that kept investigators awake. Not just the disappearance of a person, but the erasure of identity, like someone tearing pages out of a book and scattering the fragments across Europe. Despite the police's ruling of suicide, some officers remained troubled. One former detective admitted years later that the case had never sat right with him. People don't remove every label on their clothing, carry multiple wigs, and travel under false names if they're just looking to end their life, he said. It felt like she was being followed, or she was following someone else. There were also inconsistencies. Witnesses remembered her being in good spirits in the days before her death. She smiled. She spoke with interest about art and music. She purchased food and asked hotel staff for directions. There was no note, no messages left behind, and no trace of panic in her movements, just careful choreography. One especially puzzling clue came from the coded notes found in her luggage. While the cipher was broken relatively quickly, some analysts believed the travel log had a second layer of meaning. Specific cities, like Stavanger and Trondheim, were visited repeatedly, sometimes for just a single night. The short stays didn't seem to align with typical tourism or business. And each time, she checked into hotels using a new name, a new accent, and a new nationality. In several cases, she asked for rooms with balconies or views of ports and rail lines, details that drew comparisons to surveillance routines. Could she have been monitoring military movement? Could she have been a courier? There were whispers in intelligence circles. Retired agents from both NATO and the former Eastern Bloc, when asked anonymously, expressed quiet recognition of the tactics. One even remarked, "It's the kind of thing we all did back then, remove traces, move often, blend in." But if the Isdal woman had been part of such operations, then who had she worked for? No agency ever claimed her. No country stepped forward. And decades later, most Cold War records remain classified or destroyed. Adding further mystery, an artist's reconstruction of her face, created with forensic precision, was broadcast globally. It sparked dozens of leads, but none verified. A woman in Belgium claimed she'd once shared a hostel with someone matching the description. A German man insisted he had danced with her at a nightclub in the late 1960s. But each story dissolved under scrutiny. In an era before social media, before biometric passports, it was entirely possible to disappear. All you needed was a few fake names, enough money, and the will to vanish. Then there was her dental work. Gold crowns, placed in a specific pattern rarely seen in Norway at the time, hinted at Eastern or Central European origins. Experts suggested the work was done sometime in the 1950s, perhaps in a region like East Germany, Poland, or Austria. It was expensive, clearly performed by a skilled dentist. But even this offered no name, no specific clinic, no family to trace. As journalists took up the case in later years, they uncovered yet another oddity. In the years just before her death, several similar cases had surfaced across Europe. Women found dead under mysterious circumstances, often near forests, lakes, or borders. These cases, too, involved multiple passports, sudden disappearances, and a near-total lack of personal information. None were conclusively linked, but some theorists began to suspect a pattern, a network of operatives, or perhaps a single predator targeting women who lived on society's margins, those able to vanish without anyone noticing. Modern forensic experts attempted to extract DNA from preserved tissue samples. Unfortunately, degradation over time, coupled with limited resources and sample contamination, made a full profile nearly impossible. There was talk of exhuming her remains for additional testing, but legal and ethical debates stalled the process. Still, researchers hoped that one day, a familial match might emerge in a genealogy database. But with no country of origin and no known relatives, the odds remained slim. Meanwhile, the emotional weight of the case was not lost on those involved. The priest who oversaw her burial admitted to feeling a sense of sadness he couldn't quite name. It was not just a funeral, he later recalled. It was like burying a question. The police officers who attended the ceremony laid flowers on her grave every year for a time, sometimes anonymously. Others left small notes, folded neatly, tucked into the grass, containing thoughts, apologies, or prayers. In more recent years, artists and poets have taken inspiration from the Isdal woman. One theater company staged a play imagining her final days, portraying her not as a victim or a spy, but as a woman fleeing a past she could not escape. Others have painted her likeness in modern clothing, placing her in bustling cities or alongside Cold War maps. It's as if the absence of answers has made her into a canvas, one on which people project their own fears, hopes, and theories. What continues to haunt those who study the case is not just the mystery itself, but the discipline behind it. The consistency, the details. She knew how to move without being followed. She knew how to hide in plain sight. And she knew how to erase nearly every trace, except for the one that would lead us here, the body left in the forest. The fire, the fog, the stillness. It's almost as though she wanted to vanish completely, but left just enough behind to ensure we'd never stop asking who she was. Her story lives on, not as a horror or a tragedy, but as a mystery that refuses to fade. There is no final page, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees of Isdalen, the unanswered questions that echo through time, and a name we may never know. The disappearance of Lars Mittink, 2014. In the summer of 2014, a 28-year-old German man named Lars Mittink traveled to Bulgaria with a group of friends. They had chosen the seaside resort town of Golden Sands, near the city of Varna, for its warm weather and affordable nightlife. It was a popular destination for young European tourists, crowded, sunny, and lined with beach bars and open-air clubs. Lars was quiet and friendly, not known for taking risks. He worked as a technician at a power plant in northern Germany and had never caused trouble. He was in good health and had a close relationship with his family. To most who knew him, he was grounded and reliable. The trip started out like many others, swimming during the day, going out at night. But during one of their evenings out, a minor disagreement would set off a chain of strange and troubling events. According to his friends, Lars got into a small argument with other German tourists over football teams. Nothing serious, just some spirited words exchanged. But later that night, Lars told his friends that he had been followed and attacked by a group of men, possibly connected to the argument. He said he had been punched in the head. The next morning, Lars complained of ear pain. A doctor at a local clinic diagnosed him with a ruptured eardrum and advised against flying. The group's vacation was over, but because Lars couldn't board a plane with his injury, his friends flew home while he decided to stay behind to recover. He checked into a modest hotel near the airport, Hotel Color. This is where the story began to shift into something more unsettling. Lars called his mother and said he felt unsafe. He told her that he was being followed and that he believed someone was trying to poison his food. He asked her to cancel his credit cards. Then he abruptly left the hotel during the night, only to return hours later. Hotel staff later said he appeared anxious, pacing and nervous. Still, the next day, July 8th, Lars had a follow-up appointment at the airport's medical center to check his ear. What happened next was captured on security cameras. Lars entered the clinic with his backpack in hand. According to the staff, a construction worker entered the building soon after. This may have startled him, though there's no indication the two interacted. Suddenly, Lars bolted out of the clinic without warning. Security footage showed him running out of the terminal. He abandoned his bag, sprinted across the airport parking lot, scaled a fence, and disappeared into a field bordered by trees. He was never seen again. Search teams scoured the area. Helicopters, dogs, and drones were used in the following days. But there were no confirmed sightings. No signs of a struggle. No belongings other than the backpack he had left behind. That bag contained his wallet, passport, and phone, all abandoned at the airport. For his family, the disappearance was unexplainable. Lars had no known mental health issues. He wasn't on any drugs, and there were no financial or legal troubles. He had simply vanished in broad daylight. Over the years, various tips came in. A truck driver claimed to have seen someone matching his description walking near a motorway weeks later. Others reported sightings in different parts of Eastern Europe. None of these could be verified. One theory suggested that Lars may have experienced a sudden mental health crisis, possibly triggered by a reaction to antibiotics he had been prescribed for his ear. The medication, ciprofloxacin, has been known in rare cases to cause side effects like anxiety or paranoia. Combined with the stress of being injured, alone, and in a foreign country, it may have created a sense of fear or disorientation. Another theory proposed that he may have been targeted or coerced. Perhaps the conflict earlier in the trip was more serious than his friends believed. Maybe he felt watched for reasons he couldn't explain. His behavior at the hotel, locking himself in his room, whispering over the phone, suggested genuine distress. But again, there was no hard evidence. No ransom notes. No bank withdrawals. His digital presence remained frozen from the day he disappeared. His mother, Sandra Mittink, continued the search for years. She shared his story online, appeared in interviews, and never gave up hope that her son might still be alive. Age-progressed images were created to show what he might look like today. His case became one of the most widely circulated disappearances in Europe. Yet, nothing definitive has emerged. The footage of Lars running from the airport remains one of the most haunting pieces of video related to a missing person. There was no clear reason for his panic. No one was seen chasing him. And yet, something made him flee with a fear so powerful he left behind everything he owned. Some believe he may have chosen to start over somewhere new, away from his old life. Others think he may have met with an accident or, tragically, ended his life in the remote woods near the airport. But those who know him best say that none of it fits. Lars was not impulsive. He wasn't the kind of person to disappear without a trace. In the years since, the forests and hills around Varna have remained quiet. Occasionally, someone comes forward with a new tip or a theory. Sometimes travelers post photos of men who resemble Lars in faraway places. But as of today, no verified sightings have been confirmed. His case remains open. His mother still hopes. The days after Lars vanished were marked by quiet urgency. Authorities combed through the nearby fields, the edges of the airport, and the forest beyond. Dogs traced faint scents that disappeared into the underbrush. Helicopters circled overhead, their engines humming softly against the sky, scanning for signs, a movement, a piece of clothing, a path disturbed in the tall grass. Nothing was found. The airport security footage, studied frame by frame, revealed only what had already been seen. Lars ran. His stride was fast and purposeful, not stumbling or erratic. He moved like a man who had seen something, or believed he had, that demanded escape. Yet there was no one in pursuit. No shouts followed. The cameras captured only the echo of his retreat, the moment a life turned suddenly into absence. The small backpack he left behind remained untouched. Inside it were the symbols of routine: a wallet, a phone, a passport, items people carry without thinking. He had not brought them with him, and he had not come back for them. In that decision, abandoning his identification, his connection to the world, there was a quiet finality. Yet it wasn't the kind that closed a chapter. It only raised more questions. Back in Germany, his mother Sandra waited by the phone. She had spoken to him just days before, heard the unease in his voice, the tension he tried to contain. He had whispered during their call from the hotel, said someone was following him. He had asked her to cancel his bank cards. At the time, it all felt surreal, like fear blooming without a clear cause. She contacted the embassy, filed reports, posted his photo across online communities. When the footage surfaced, Lars sprinting through the airport and leaping into the wild, it felt both shocking and, somehow, familiar. A final image to match the panic he had tried to describe. In the years that followed, Lars became something more than a missing person. He became a question shared by thousands. Online forums collected theories, some careful, others wild. People rewatched the footage late at night. Some believed they saw meaning in the way he turned his head or clenched his hands. Others looked for patterns in his medical treatment, drawing connections between the antibiotic he was prescribed, ciprofloxacin, and the psychological side effects it can, on rare occasions, cause: anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations. Could the combination of ear trauma, isolation, and medication have altered his sense of reality? It was possible, but it was also speculation. There were no medical records pointing to a breakdown, no history of delusions or confusion, just the behavior itself: pacing, whispers, abrupt movements, captured in brief windows of time. Some witnesses added fragments to the puzzle. A truck driver reported seeing someone who resembled Lars walking near a motorway, weeks after the disappearance. Another sighting placed him in a different town altogether, further inland. None were confirmed. Each lead faded like vapor. There were moments of hope, too. A traveler in Canada once uploaded a photo of a man who looked remarkably like him, standing at a distance outside a convenience store. Another came from South America, a man working at a coastal hostel who barely spoke but bore an uncanny resemblance. But each time, the trail went cold. DNA didn't match. The timelines fell apart. And still, the forest in Varna remained unchanged. The trees that had silently watched him vanish continued their quiet standing. Locals sometimes walked the same paths where the search had been concentrated, unaware of the story that had passed through their hills. At the Hotel Color, where Lars had stayed, staff remembered him. The young man who kept to himself, who checked in without a fuss, who left in the middle of the night, came back, and then vanished for good. Some said he seemed haunted. Others said he just seemed tired. One guest who stayed the same week later wrote online that the place had a strange silence to it. Something in the walls or the hallway light that made the nights stretch longer. Not eerie, just still. For Sandra Mittink, the years moved slowly. She continued to tell her son's story, not with fear, but with quiet persistence. She commissioned age progression portraits, imagining what his face might look like now. A little older, his hair a touch thinner, his eyes still searching. She wrote letters, hoping they might find him wherever he was, if he was anywhere still watching. She didn't believe he had meant to disappear. She believed something had happened, something urgent, something unexplainable, something that cracked the world he knew just enough to make him run. Psychologists weighed in. Some suggested dissociative episodes. Others leaned toward trauma-induced psychosis. There was even the possibility that Lars had stumbled upon something, witnessed or overheard something, that he shouldn't have. A rare scenario, perhaps, but not impossible. The truth is, no one knows what he saw or what he believed he saw. What they have is a moment in time. A man walking into a clinic with a bandaged ear and a calm expression. A few minutes later, that same man running for the tree line as if the sky had fallen. Time moved forward. The case remained open. And in that stillness, in the gaps between facts, the story of Lars Mittink settled into quiet spaces. It lived in the hum of airport terminals, in empty hotel rooms, in forests that keep their own secrets. It became a story not of violence or confirmed loss, but of something softer, confusion, urgency, a break in the usual. And perhaps that's what continues to draw people to his story. Not because it answers questions, but because it gently holds them. The disappearance of Lars Mittink stands as a mystery wrapped in fragments. Security footage, phone calls, eyewitness reports. But none of them form a complete picture. Only the questions remain. Why did he run? What did he believe was happening? And where did he go? The answers may still be out there, resting quietly in the space between memory and mystery. Until then, the case of Lars Mittink endures, not as a story of violence or crime in the traditional sense, but as a human puzzle, one that invites reflection more than fear. The Jilgo Beach Murders and the 2023 arrest of Rex Heuermann. In 2010, along a quiet stretch of coastal road near Jilgo Beach on Long Island, New York, a search was underway. A woman named Shannon Gilbert had disappeared months earlier after calling 911 in a panic, claiming someone was after her. She was never seen again. As police searched the area where Shannon was last known to be, they came across something unexpected, something that had nothing to do with her disappearance at first glance. Wrapped in burlap along the edge of Ocean Parkway, they found the remains of another woman. Within days, they found more. Soon, the bodies of 4 young women, all believed to have worked as escorts advertising online, were discovered close together in the underbrush. It was clear they had not died recently. They had been there for some time, placed with care and concealed. The area was cordoned off, and more searches were conducted. Over time, additional remains were found, partial. Skeletons, some dismembered, some linked by DNA to remains found elsewhere. In total, the remains of 11 people were discovered across the stretch of land between Jilgo Beach and the neighboring Oak Beach area. The press began referring to the unknown killer as the Long Island serial killer or LISK. Despite the scale of the investigation, years passed without answers. There was a pattern, but few leads. Most of the victims were women who had advertised escort services online. Many were petite and in their 20s. They had vanished between 2007 and 2010, and their disappearances were not always taken seriously at the time. But the clustering of their remains, the similarities in how they were disposed, and the silence from the perpetrator pointed to a serial killer with method and patience. One of the most chilling parts was how little physical evidence there seemed to be. No DNA that matched a known suspect. No surveillance footage. No eyewitnesses. Just long-abandoned burial sites, and families left with questions. For over a decade, the case remained cold, until 2023. That year, there was an unexpected breakthrough. Authorities announced the arrest of a 59-year-old architect named Rex Heuermann. He had been living in Massapequa Park, just a short drive from Jilgo Beach. He was married with 2 children and ran a successful architectural business in Midtown Manhattan. From the outside, he appeared completely unremarkable. A professional, a father, someone who blended into the rhythms of daily life. But investigators had been watching him for some time, and the pieces had finally fallen into place. It turned out that Heuermann had been quietly under surveillance since 2022. A task force had been reassembled to re-examine the Jilgo Beach case with fresh eyes, using modern tools. They began to focus on cell phone data, including burner phones used by the suspected killer to contact victims, taunt families, and arrange meetings. Those digital traces were thin, but not invisible. As the task force cross-referenced call locations with known addresses and patterns, one name kept appearing. DNA evidence would soon play a key role. Hair had been found on some of the victims' burlap wrappings. Initially, it wasn't matched to any known profiles. But years later, through mitochondrial DNA, passed down from maternal lines, a match was made to someone close to Heuermann. Eventually, detectives obtained a sample of Heuermann's discarded pizza crust from a trash can in Manhattan. DNA extracted from it matched the male hair found on at least one of the victims. It was the link they had waited years to find. In July 2023, Heuermann was arrested and charged with the murders of 3 women: Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He was also named the prime suspect in the killing of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. These 4 women, often referred to as the Gilgo Four, were found in 2010, positioned in a similar manner, wrapped in burlap. The announcement sent shockwaves across Long Island and beyond. For over a decade, people had feared that the killer might still be among them. Now they learned he had been living quietly in a red house just miles from where the bodies were discovered. Neighbors were stunned. His home, which had fallen into disrepair over the years, had never drawn much attention. He kept to himself. His family had no known involvement in the crimes. The evidence against Heuermann included not only DNA but also digital records. He had allegedly used burner phones to contact victims and had conducted disturbing internet searches, including topics like sadistic torture and specific inquiries about the Gilgo Beach investigation. Investigators also discovered caches of weapons and surveillance systems in his home. Heuermann pled not guilty. His defense team claimed the evidence was circumstantial. But the case continued to build as the investigation expanded. Police began searching other properties linked to him, including storage units and land he owned in South Carolina. The scope of the inquiry grew, and more possible victims were re-examined. Though he had only been charged in the cases of 4 women, some speculated that the true number could be higher. Yet, as with many long unsolved crimes, some questions remain. For instance, Shannon Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance led to the discovery of the Gilgo bodies, was not among the confirmed victims of Heuermann. Her remains were found in a marsh a year after the others, and her cause of death remains undetermined. Some believe her case is separate. Others think it may be connected in ways yet to be understood. The Gilgo Beach case is notable not only for its horror, but for the long silence that surrounded it. For years, the victims were often overlooked because of their work, and some families felt that their disappearances weren't taken seriously enough. The eventual arrest brought some comfort, but also a reminder of how long justice had taken. Heuermann remains in custody as of 2025. The legal process is ongoing, and more charges may still come. But for the first time in over a decade, there is a name and a face attached to the Gilgo Beach murders, one that has turned a decade of questions into a cautious sense of closure for some. There is still more to be understood about who Rex Heuermann is, what motivated him, and how he remained hidden for so long. Investigators continue to examine other missing persons cases for potential links, and the families of other victims still hope that more answers will come. The Red House in Massapequa Park now stands empty, a silent witness to the years when someone capable of such crimes lived quietly among neighbors, children, and routine. In the wake of Rex Heuermann's arrest, Gilgo Beach itself seemed unchanged. The wind still swept across the dunes in long, whispering currents. The tall grasses rustled just as they had in 2010, brushing against weathered sand and the twisted branches of beach scrub that had once hidden unspeakable things. But for many, the landscape would never look the same. Families of the victims began to revisit the site. Not all, but some. They walked the edge of Ocean Parkway, tracing the same line of road where the first burlap bundles were discovered. Some brought flowers. Others brought silence. It wasn't closure exactly, but it was something they hadn't been able to do for over a decade. The press, too, returned in waves. But as the headlines faded and the court proceedings settled into long intervals of legal process, What remained was the quiet weight of time. The years that passed between the crimes and the arrest had changed things. People had aged. The children had grown up. Parents had carried the loss with them through seasons, holidays, and empty rooms. And for those who still lived near Jilgo Beach, there was a lingering unease, a reminder that beneath the surface of the ordinary, someone had hidden something extraordinary in its cruelty and calculation. For over a decade, there had been no warning signs, no knocking in the night, just silence. The Red House in Massapequa Park, once just another aging home on a tree-lined street, became a point of fascination. Its paint had peeled with time. Weeds curled along the foundation. Inside, investigators had spent weeks gathering evidence. Neighbors recalled little. Heumann was not the kind of person people noticed. He came and went. He didn't make noise. He didn't stir gossip. In the end, that was part of what made the revelation so chilling. How someone could move unnoticed through a world that always seemed so loud and connected. Back in the Manhattan office where he had worked, co-workers struggled to reconcile what they knew. Some remembered him as meticulous, reserved, intensely focused. Others recalled offhand comments that now felt different, unsettling in hindsight. His workspace had once been filled with blueprints and drafting tools. He was a man who built things, structures, plans, walls. But behind that was something else, something that no one had seen or dared to believe. The task force that brought Heumann into custody had done so after a careful, patient operation. It had taken years to gather the digital traces, the DNA comparisons, the location pings from burner phones. But they did what earlier investigators could not. They waited. They watched. They connected the smallest of dots. And when the time came, they moved with certainty. Still, there was no celebration. For detectives, solving a case like this isn't triumph, it's relief. Relief that a name has been found. That a family might finally receive a call. That the shadows of suspicion cast on countless others could begin to clear. But it also meant facing what had been missed. The lost years. The early warnings that might have gone unheeded. The knowledge that someone capable of this had remained free for so long. The victims' names, Melissa Barthélemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, were spoken aloud again, not as statistics or cold cases, but as people. Each had a life before they vanished. Friends. Laughter. Families who had waited for years with only fragments to hold on to. They weren't defined by their final days. They were remembered for more than the way they were found. And beyond the victims officially linked to Heumann, other families watched closely. Those whose loved ones disappeared along similar timelines. Those whose daughters or sisters were never found at all. For them, the arrest brought hope, but also more questions. Could there be more victims? More sites yet undiscovered? Was this the end of the story, or just a chapter? Some wondered whether the full truth would ever be known. Court proceedings moved slowly. Evidence was introduced in careful steps: digital records, genetic matches, phone logs, and maps. Behind the scenes, investigators were still working, searching properties, interviewing witnesses from years past, reviewing cold cases with fresh eyes. Heuermann's defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that a discarded pizza crust and burner phone logs couldn't tell the whole story. But to many, the weight of everything, the patterns, the timing, the items found in his home, felt too specific to ignore. And yet, in a case built on years of mystery, nothing was simple. For those living with the story, there was a rhythm to the aftermath. Long pauses between updates. The steady unfolding of a case that had waited too long for answers. And in those silences, people reflected. They thought of Shannan Gilbert, the woman whose call for help set everything in motion. Her final moments were still unclear. Her cause of death, undetermined. Some believed she had simply become lost in the marsh that night, disoriented and frightened. Others believed there was more to her story, an encounter, a chase, a secret unspoken. Regardless of how her life ended, Shannan's disappearance had led to the discovery of so much more. She had not been forgotten. Her mother, Marie Gilbert, had fought for years to keep the case in the public eye. She had challenged authorities, demanded justice, and brought attention to the lives of women who might otherwise have been overlooked. Marie herself was tragically killed in 2016, but her efforts had left a mark. Her voice, like Shanann's, echoed through the story. Now, in the quiet that followed the arrest, there was space to remember them, not just as victims of a serial killer, but as individuals. As people. The beach remained. The tide continued its endless pull. The dunes whispered in the wind. And among the grasses where the remains had once been found, there was a new kind of stillness, not empty, but watchful. The story of the Jilgo Beach murders wasn't just about loss. It was about time, about silence, about the years between vanishing and discovery, and about the moments, however brief, when justice begins to stir from its long sleep. As with so many true crime stories, this one lingers, not just because of the crimes themselves, but because of the long span of silence that followed them. The arrest of Rex Heuermann marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that may finally bring resolution to the mystery of Jilgo Beach. The vanishing of Dorothy Arnold, 1910. In the winter of 1910, New York City was bustling with life. The streets were filled with horse-drawn carriages, streetcars, and pedestrians weaving through snow-dusted avenues. Wealthy families held elegant parties behind the ornate doors of their Upper East Side brownstones, while newsboys hawked headlines in the streets. Amid this setting, on the morning of December 12th, a young woman named Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold left her family's home at 108 East 79th Street. She told her mother she was going shopping for a dress to wear to her sister's upcoming debutante party. Dorothy was 25 years old. She came from a prominent and wealthy family. Her father, Francis Arnold, was a successful importer and descended from old-money New England roots. The Arnolds were part of New York's upper crust, and Dorothy had been raised in comfort and privilege. She was well educated, having graduated from Bryn Mawr College with a degree in literature. Dorothy had aspirations of becoming a writer. She had submitted short stories to several magazines, though none had been accepted. She kept these rejections private from her family, storing the letters in her desk drawer. On the morning she vanished, Dorothy left the house just after 11 a.m. She was dressed modestly but fashionably. A tailored blue coat, a matching velvet hat, high-button boots, and a muff to keep her hands warm. She carried a small amount of money, around $25, enough for some light shopping. She walked toward Fifth Avenue, stopping first at the Park and Tilford candy shop, where she purchased a half-pound box of chocolates. She then made her way to Brentano's bookstore at 26th Street, a place she frequented. There, she bought a book of humorous essays and briefly chatted with a clerk who knew her by face. She seemed calm, cheerful even. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. It was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy Arnold. She never returned home. No one in her family saw her again. And despite a massive search that would span continents and decades, no trace of her was ever found. Initially, her disappearance was kept quiet. The Arnolds, fearing scandal and gossip, told friends she was visiting a cousin. It wasn't until weeks had passed that they reported her missing to the police. By then, any physical trail had gone cold. Detectives launched a wide-ranging investigation. They canvassed hospitals, boarding houses, and even morgues. Private detectives were hired by the family, including the Pinkerton Agency. They pursued hundreds of leads, sightings in cities across the U.S., rumors of amnesia, false confessions, and anonymous letters. One theory suggested that Dorothy had staged her own disappearance. She had grown increasingly frustrated with her life. Her father had dismissed her writing ambitions and refused to let her move to Greenwich Village, where she hoped to live independently. Some believed she may have run away to start a new life, perhaps even abroad. But this theory came with problems. Dorothy had left no note. She hadn't packed a suitcase. She had taken only a small amount of money with her, and there were no confirmed bank withdrawals or evidence of secret planning. Others suspected foul play. Perhaps she had been abducted while walking through Central Park, or assaulted in a side street. But there was no struggle reported, no scream heard. And in the daylight hours of a busy Manhattan afternoon, it seemed unlikely that she could simply vanish without someone noticing. Another possibility, whispered quietly among investigators and hinted at by the press, was that Dorothy had become pregnant and had sought an illegal procedure, a dangerous and clandestine operation, especially in 1910. This theory was bolstered by the fact that months before her disappearance, Dorothy had traveled to Boston under the pretense of visiting friends, though she had never told her family the real reason for her trip. While in Boston, she had met with George Griscom Jr., a man she had been romantically involved with. George Griscom was older than Dorothy and came from a wealthy Pittsburgh family. He was known to be somewhat eccentric, even a bit irresponsible. Dorothy's parents disapproved of the relationship and forbade them from seeing each other, but she continued to write to him in secret. After her disappearance, investigators questioned Griscom, who was staying in Italy at the time. He denied knowing anything about what had happened and claimed he had not seen her in months. Still, the press latched onto the idea of a doomed romance, painting the mystery as a tragic love story. Dorothy's father remained convinced that she had been abducted and murdered. He never stopped searching. Over the years, the family received dozens of tips and even ransom notes, though none led anywhere. In one particularly eerie episode, a woman matching Dorothy's description was reportedly seen entering the Central Park Reservoir the evening of her disappearance. The lead was never confirmed, and dredging the reservoir yielded nothing. Years passed. The family eventually moved out of the 79th Street home. Dorothy's mother, heartbroken, withdrew from public life. Her father passed away in 1922, still not knowing what had happened to his daughter. Though the case faded from headlines, it was never truly forgotten. In the decades that followed, Dorothy Arnold's disappearance became something of a cautionary tale, repeated in true crime columns, whispered in elite social circles, and referenced in books about unsolved mysteries. Despite the hundreds of pages of investigative records, no physical evidence has ever surfaced. Her body was never found. No one was ever charged. And every theory remains just that, a theory. In retrospect, what makes Dorothy's disappearance so haunting is how ordinary her final day seemed. She bought chocolates. She browsed for books. She smiled politely to the clerk. And then she was gone. The case is also a window into the culture of its time. In 1910, there was a deep stigma around mental health, women's independence, and family reputation. Some critics of the investigation pointed to how slowly the case was taken seriously, how much effort was spent maintaining appearances rather than raising alarms. If the same disappearance happened today, with the benefit of surveillance footage, digital footprints, GPS data, and forensic science, it might have played out differently. But in 1910, the world was a vastly different place. Investigations relied heavily on word of mouth, newspaper appeals, and slow-moving police work. Detectives walked door to door, relying on the accuracy of memory, often distorted by time or bias. There were no centralized databases to cross-reference sightings or analyze behavioral patterns. Once someone stepped beyond their expected routine, they could fade into the urban sprawl like fog into night. Dorothy's social standing both helped and hindered the search. On one hand, her family's wealth gave them access to resources, private detectives, the press, and political influence. On the other, their fear of social embarrassment caused critical delays. The Arnold family initially contacted no authorities, hoping to handle the matter discreetly. They even went so far as to intercept Dorothy's mail and contact her friends under false pretenses, hoping she might return on her own. By the time police were officially involved, weeks had passed. Investigators tried to trace her movements beyond Brentano's bookstore but came up short. No one recalled seeing her enter a cab. No one spotted her in Central Park or boarding a train. The trail was cold before it even began. Some detectives speculated that Dorothy might have taken her own life, perhaps driven by personal disappointment, pressure from her family, or heartbreak. But this theory lacked physical evidence. No body was found, no note was left, and no indications had been made to suggest she was in a deeply depressive state. Meanwhile, George Griscom Jr., the man Dorothy had been secretly seeing, remained under scrutiny. Letters recovered from her room hinted at an intense and emotional connection, though it was unclear if it was reciprocated with the same intensity. Griscom wrote of love and promises, but his actions didn't align with a frantic lover searching the world for a lost partner. When pressed, he insisted Dorothy had not reached out to him. Still, doubts lingered. Had she tried to meet him in Italy, only to be intercepted, or perhaps betrayed? Had he helped her vanish intentionally? The media seized on every angle. Some headlines painted Dorothy as a headstrong modern woman, stifled by her conservative upbringing. Others speculated on scandal, an elopement gone wrong, or a botched medical procedure in a shadowy clinic. One popular rumor suggested she had slipped on ice in Central Park, struck her head, and perished quietly beneath a snowbank, her body missing during the winter searches. This, too, remained unconfirmed. Investigators also explored the possibility of mistaken identity. Perhaps Dorothy had suffered a breakdown or memory loss and was living under another name, unaware of who she was. Amnesia was a commonly cited condition in the early 20th century, though rarely proven. Hospitals were visited. Sanitariums were questioned. None produced a match. Even spiritualists and mediums were consulted in desperation. Seances were held, pendulums swung, and psychic visions were reported, but none led anywhere. The case, with all its twists and theories, became something of a national fascination. In some ways, it marked one of the first true crime sagas of the American press age, where public appetite for mystery clashed with the private suffering of those involved. Years turned into decades. In the 1930s, long after most hope had faded, a woman in Los Angeles claimed she was Dorothy Arnold. She walked into a police station and calmly announced her identity. Investigators found her to be mentally unstable, and she eventually admitted to fabricating the story. But the episode revived public interest, sparking another round of newspaper headlines. Meanwhile, amateur sleuths and armchair detectives continued to write about the case. Each generation seemed to discover Dorothy's story anew, drawn in by the timeless strangeness of someone disappearing in broad daylight. What also kept the case alive was its setting. New York City, often considered the place where everything is seen, had somehow failed to notice a young woman slip away forever. The idea that someone could vanish between two shops, amid thousands of pedestrians, stirred the imagination. It felt uncanny, almost supernatural, though every explanation was deeply human. In time, Dorothy Arnold became more than just a missing person. She became a symbol. Her name appeared in pulp novels, fictionalized radio shows, and noir detective stories. She was cast alternately as victim, rebel, runaway, or fallen woman, depending on the moral lens of the storyteller. But the real Dorothy, the one who loved literature and dreamed of publication, remained out of reach. Historians looking back have noted how much Dorothy's case reflected the anxieties of her time. She was a woman caught between eras, between Victorian expectations and the beginnings of female autonomy. Her desire for independence clashed with a world that still expected her to marry well, remain quiet, and let go of dreams deemed unladylike. Her vanishing seemed to speak not only to physical absence but to the erasure of identity, ambition, and voice. What might Dorothy have written, had she been given the space? What stories lived in her desk drawer, beyond the rejection letters? It's possible we'll never know, but it's worth remembering that behind every cold case, every headline, every faded black and white photograph, was a life with direction, plans, and imagination. The loss is not only in the mystery, it's in the unwritten chapters. But in the quiet, analog world of early 20th century New York, a person could truly vanish. What happened to Dorothy Arnold remains one of the oldest unsolved missing persons cases in American history. There have been no confirmed sightings, no death certificate, no grave. Just an empty space in family records, and a name carried forward through decades of questions. Her story is quiet, not sensational. It contains no dramatic confrontation, no courtroom finale, but it lingers, not just for the mystery, but for the life interrupted. A young woman with dreams of authorship. A frustrated voice in a time when women's ambitions were often dismissed. And a city that moved on while one family kept looking. Though time has passed, the mystery endures, a reminder of how fragile presence can be, and how a life can slip from sight even in the most familiar of places. The Lizzie Borden case, 1892. In the quiet town of Fall River, Massachusetts, nestled along the Taunton River, life moved at a steady pace in the late 19th century. The streets were lined with modest homes, horse-drawn carriages clattered along cobblestone paths, and townsfolk went about their lives with familiar routines and close-knit community ties. It was in this tranquil setting that one of the most famous and debated true crime stories in American history unfolded. A case that would stir headlines, spark gossip, and remain a subject of speculation for generations. On the morning of August 4, 1892, the Borden family's home at 92 2nd Street seemed, at first glance, to be experiencing an ordinary day. The house was a simple, two-story residence without much ornamentation, reflecting the frugality of its owner, Andrew Borden, one of Fall River's wealthier citizens. Though he was well off, Andrew was known for his stern personality and austere lifestyle. He lived in the house with his second wife, Abby, and his two adult daughters, Lizzie and Emma. Lizzie, the younger of the two sisters, was 32 at the time. She was unmarried, deeply religious, and active in her church community. Her relationship with her stepmother was strained at best, and tensions in the Borden household had been simmering for some time. There were frequent disputes about money and inheritance, particularly concerning Andrew's gifts of property to Abby's relatives. Emma, Liz's older sister, had left town on the morning of August 3rd to visit friends in Fairhaven, leaving Lizzie, Abby, Andrew, and the maid, Bridget Sullivan, at home. That next morning, Bridget was asked to clean the windows despite the heat. She did so reluctantly, feeling unwell. Andrew had gone out for a morning walk and returned home shortly before 11 a.m., where he sat in the parlor to rest. Around 11:10 a.m., Lizzie called out to Bridget with a calm but urgent voice, "Come quick. Father's dead. Somebody came in and killed him." When Bridget entered the sitting room, she found Andrew Borden slumped on the couch, his face unrecognizable from multiple blows. He had been attacked with a sharp, heavy object, later believed to be a hatchet. The wounds were brutal, yet he appeared to have died quickly. Police were called, and as they arrived to investigate, a second, even more shocking discovery was made. Abby Borden was found upstairs in the guest bedroom, lying face down in a pool of blood. Like her husband, she had been attacked with a bladed weapon, receiving multiple blows to the back of her head. The violent nature of the murders stunned the community. In Fall River, a double homicide was unheard of, and the sheer savagery of the killings ignited a wave of fear and suspicion. From the beginning, suspicion fell on Lizzie. Her account of the morning was inconsistent. At first, she claimed she had been in the barn looking for fishing sinkers. Then she said she had been ironing handkerchiefs in the kitchen. Investigators found it odd that she had heard nothing during the time her stepmother was killed upstairs, an event that likely occurred before Andrew even returned home. Bridget, the maid, had reportedly been resting in her attic room at the time of the murders, having been given permission to take a nap after her chores. As investigators questioned Lizzie further, other peculiarities emerged. A neighbor reported that Lizzie had attempted to buy prussic acid, a poisonous substance, a day before the murders, though this account was later disputed. Even more curiously, a few days after the murders, Lizzie was seen burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She claimed it had been stained with paint and was no longer useful, but police wondered if it might have been the dress worn during the attacks. Despite the questions surrounding her, Lizzie was not arrested immediately. It was only after a formal inquest that authorities felt they had sufficient cause, and on August 11th, she was taken into custody and charged with the murders of her father and stepmother. The news swept the country. The idea that a quiet, respectable woman from a prominent family could commit such a crime was both shocking and titillating to the public. Newspaper headlines blared with speculation. Artists rendered sketches of the courtroom. It became one of the first true crime stories to capture national attention in a media frenzy. Liz's trial began in June of 1893 and was held in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, and seats inside were limited. The prosecution laid out its case, focusing on Liz's inconsistent statements, the timing of the murders, and the burning of the dress. They also pointed to the strained family dynamics and the possible motive, resentment over money, and property disputes. The defense, however, countered with a portrait of Lizzie as a dutiful daughter and a victim of circumstance. They emphasized the lack of physical evidence linking her directly to the crimes. There were no fingerprints, no blood-soaked clothing discovered, and no eyewitnesses. Additionally, the weapon used in the murders, a hatchet found in the basement, was never definitively proven to be the murder weapon. It was covered in ash and dust, and while suspicious, it did not carry conclusive proof. Lizzie did not take the stand in her own defense, as was her right. Her composure in the courtroom was closely watched, and opinions on her demeanor varied. Some saw her as cold and unfeeling. Others interpreted her as poised and unfairly scrutinized. After 2 weeks of testimony and argument, the jury deliberated for just over an hour. They returned a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom gasped. Lizzie reportedly burst into tears and embraced her lawyers. She was acquitted, but her life was never the same. Following the trial, Lizzie and her sister Emma purchased a new home in a more affluent part of Fall River. The house was dubbed Maplecroft, and Lizzie even changed her name to Lisbeth in an attempt to distance herself from the scandal. But public opinion never fully cleared her name. Whispers followed her in shops and church pews. Neighborhood children sang rhymes about the case. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The poem, though inaccurate in its details, etched the case into American folklore. Despite being found not guilty, Lizzie Borden became a figure of enduring suspicion and fascination. She lived a relatively quiet life after the trial but never escaped the shadow of those events. Her relationship with Emma eventually deteriorated, and the two sisters grew apart. Lizzie passed away in 1927, at the age of 66, after a long illness. Emma died shortly after, in a nursing home. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. There are countless theories. Some suggest Bridget the maid was involved, driven by resentment or trauma. Others believe a stranger could have entered the home. But no new evidence has emerged, and the questions linger. The enduring mystery of the Borden case lies not only in the brutality of the crime, but in its lack of resolution. Over the decades, scholars, amateur sleuths, and crime historians have tried to re-examine every known detail. Each statement, each piece of evidence, each moment that might have been overlooked in the chaotic aftermath of the murders. With modern techniques unavailable at the time, much of the physical evidence that could have been decisive, such as DNA or even thorough blood spatter analysis, was never collected or preserved. This has left the case permanently in the realm of speculation, where theories must rely on logic, psychology, and the incomplete records of a 19th-century investigation. One of the recurring debates is the timeline of the murders. Investigators believe that Abby Borden was killed sometime between 9 o'clock and 10:30 a.m., while Andrew was likely murdered closer to 11 o'clock. This suggests that whoever committed the first murder remained in the house for a period of time before killing again, or that there were two different perpetrators. The theory that Lizzie could have murdered Abby in the upstairs guest bedroom, cleaned herself up, and then calmly waited for her father to return before striking again is unsettling to consider, but possible, if one believes she was cold and calculating. Yet the logistics remain tricky. There was little time to clean up blood spatter in an era without running water on every floor. No bloody footprints were found. No clothing stained with blood was ever recovered. If Lizzie did commit the murders, how did she manage to stay clean and undetected in a small house with only thin walls and one maid? Bridget, too, remained a curious figure in the case. Some have speculated that she may have known or suspected more than she admitted. After all, she was in the house at the time of both murders, albeit resting in the attic after being made to clean windows in the oppressive heat. Perhaps she heard something, or perhaps she was too afraid to speak. Some theorists suggest that Bridget herself may have snapped, possibly during a conflict with Abby over household chores, or in a fit of rage after being ordered about once too often. But no physical evidence pointed toward her, and her story remained relatively consistent over time. She later moved to Montana, married, and lived a quiet life, refusing to ever speak publicly about what she had seen that day. Her silence only deepened the mystery. In the years that followed the trial, rumors and confessions occasionally surfaced. People claimed to have found new letters, overheard deathbed confessions, or uncovered old secrets in forgotten attics. None of these ever produced solid leads. Lizzie herself never spoke directly about the murders after her acquittal. She avoided interviews, lived off her inheritance, and surrounded herself with a small circle of loyal friends. She donated to animal charities and occasionally attended the theater, but remained a recluse by the standards of her social class. Some of Liz's friends insisted she was incapable of such violence. They described her as generous, pious, and gentle, someone who loved animals and cared deeply about her reputation. Others, however, saw in her a quiet, simmering resentment. Lizzie had never married, never moved away, and had lived under the shadow of her father's control well into adulthood. Did that repression eventually erupt in violence? Or did she simply suffer the fate of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, without any way to prove her innocence? Modern criminologists have looked at the case with fresh eyes, applying psychological profiles and behavioral analysis. Many note that if Lizzie had been a man, the trial might have played out very differently. In 1892, women were still viewed by much of society as delicate, nurturing, and emotionally fragile. The idea that a woman could deliver such savage blows with a hatchet, especially to her own father, was almost unthinkable. And yet, those perceptions may have worked both ways. Some jurors may have struggled to reconcile the gruesomeness of the crime with the image of a soft-spoken, church-going woman. The shock alone may have made them more hesitant to convict. This raises a deeper question about justice in historical crimes. Was Lizzie acquitted because there was reasonable doubt? Or because society wasn't ready to believe that a woman, particularly one of status and refinement, could commit such a monstrous act? In either case, the court's decision did not absolve her in the eyes of the public. In fact, the ambiguity of the outcome made her legend more potent. The not guilty verdict transformed her from a defendant into an enigma, one whose guilt or innocence became a matter of opinion rather than legal fact. The cultural impact of the case extended far beyond Fall River. It inspired plays, novels, films, and scholarly debates. The Borring murders became a symbol of suppressed rage and domestic claustrophobia, often used as a lens through which to explore gender roles and the limits of justice. Even today, visitors to the Borring house report an eerie sense of stillness, a kind of historical residue that clings to the walls. The rooms have been carefully preserved to resemble their 1892 state, down to the wallpaper patterns and furniture placement. Guests often remark on how small the house feels, how easily sounds could carry, how impossible it would be to move undetected. These details seem to deepen the sense that someone, at some point, had to have seen or heard something that day. That someone, somewhere, knew the truth, and took it with them to the grave. And so the case lives on, not in active investigation, but in quiet obsessions, late-night readings, and whispered debates. The Lizzie Borring story is less about closure than about the human need to find meaning in the inexplicable. A locked house, a hot August day, 2 brutal killings, and a woman who never changed her story, never fled, never confessed. Was Lizzie Borring guilty? Or was she simply a convenient suspect in a time when women were rarely seen as capable of such acts, and therefore, perhaps, harder to defend when accused? The Borring house still stands today, preserved as a bed and breakfast and museum. Visitors come from all over to tour the rooms, examine the crime scene layout, and contemplate the mystery for themselves. But in the calm that follows decades of speculation, what remains is not the blood or the trial transcripts, but the strange, silent space between the facts. A wealthy family, a quiet town, a summer morning, and 2 lives ended, without warning or explanation. And one woman, whose name has echoed through American history, not because she was proven guilty, but because no one ever proved she wasn't.